Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to call to order the work session in regard to AO 2015-69 airport land trade, and whoever is going to present has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dean Tobish, Senior Planner with the Planning Department. I'd like to give you an overview of the ordinance towards the end of the presentation, but in the interim, I'd like to provide you with some important background as to help you understand why we got here, what we're doing, what the history is of the area and the issues. For the work session, you should have gotten, hopefully, a copy of the Land Trade Task Force report.
Steve, can
Yes.
you stop for one moment?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hall reminded me, I'm sorry,
All right.
that I need to take it from this. Can we start with Steve? Thank you.
Absolutely. Dean
Well, the
Tobish.
lights went out, you know.
I know.
Yeah.
Dean Tobish, Planning Department.
Jerry Weaver, Community Development.
John Parrott, Anchorage Airport.
Bill Evans, Assembly.
Tim Steele.
Elvie Gray Jackson.
Ernie Hall.
Thank you.
Okay, so as well as the report, you should have gotten two paper handouts, a couple pages each, with background information on the snow dump, and we have somebody here from street maintenance to give you more detail on that a little later on. So the ordinance before you is interim agreement for a fair market value agreement, exchange of land for the snow dump and the airport parcel. There's basically two parcels involved right now. The snow dump is on airport land and potential future use of Point Warren's Park. So just for orientation, and we'll get to this later, the street maintenance facility is in the green highlight off of International Airport Road. The snow disposal facility is to the east, to the west of that, and depending on the future need, upwards of about 25 acres of land. I think you're otherwise pretty well oriented there. So I'd like to give you through the slides of why we're here, important background and history of the issues around the airport, which remains a complex long-term planning issue for the municipality. So in the 80s, beginning with the comp plan in the 80s, 1982, the wetland management plan in 1982, and the coastal management plan just prior to that, the airport issues came to the fore and the municipality had planning documents to attempt to begin to address that. These were focused again in the Anchorage 2020 plan in 2001, which summarized basically implementation policy providing for a West Anchorage district plan that was to address land use issues for West, as well as attempt to resolve complex airport issues. The West Anchorage district plan followed that implementation, adopted in 2012. Some of you were involved with that. And that highlighted Chapter 4, extensive history and background of the airport and the complex planning issues, as well as had implementation policies in Chapter 5 to attempt to address those.
Steve?
Yes.
Excuse me one moment, please. For the record, I'd like to recognize Mr. Flynn. He has just joined the meeting.
Thank you.
And please feel free to ask questions as I'm going along. So one of the implementation policies from the West District Plan was to address and resolve these long-term planning issues at the airport perimeter, and highlighted the need to convene a task force to delve into that process, which the administration, the planning department convened early in 2014. And you have a copy of their report that was produced later that year. So briefly, bullet statements here, but the land use conflicts that have surrounded the airport edge for upwards of 40 years, you can highlight as basically a strategic location of the airport relative to residential communities and private land, and relative to municipal parks and trails. Neighborhoods encroached onto the airport edge, airport activities and expansion encroached into the neighborhood, into the parks and trails. Municipality established public use, public recreation uses on certain airport lands through the years. Those lands are not permanently owned by the municipality, nor are they permanent parkland. The snow disposal facility has expanded over the years, and we are at the point where we need to make permanent improvements to that, which requires that we have site control of that land. The airport is guided very strictly by numerous FAA guidelines and grant assurances, which requires them to preserve airport land, vacant or otherwise, forever for future airport needs as part of the national airport system. And in there is an established recognition by the airport in previous master plans and their current master plan that they will need a new runway. They may need a new runway in the future. All right. So for some context, here's 1970 Anchorage International Airport down there at the bottom. So Wisconsin Drive is roughly here. So in 1970, there was essentially no residential development and not a lot around Wisconsin Drive. And there was, it's hard to see at the bottom, but there's essentially no development except for a few houses right here on the south side of the airport. So we superimposed that with the airport boundary. And I'm not working this right. Sorry. There's a slide here, the current 2014 airport boundary on that 1970 aerial to give you a better picture of that. So we moved to 2012 roughly, and it's not much different now, but here's the airport, recent airport. You can see the expansion. Again, my scale's a little off. You can't see the bottom, but there's residential development completely along the the south side and the east side of the airport. And airport expansion is slowly moving and is planned to continue to move to the east. Up in here, maybe. And to the south. Here's again the boundary, current boundary of the current photo. So this is a tough slide to see. I don't know why it happened this way, but this shows you the evolution of growth at the airport through the years. And you can see roughly starting in 75, but especially in the 80s, considerable growth and expansion, mainly the north-south runway and facilities associated with that. And that was probably coincident with why the municipality began to pursue planning actions in their documents in those same time frame. And then again, here you can see the time frame of the Anchorage 2020, showing the need for that resolution of those issues. Just to dial in a little bit, you can see the perimeter areas where this encroachment has occurred, both from the general aviation and the main airport, just illustrating what I spoke to earlier about the residential development. And over here, conflicts with the airport expansion and airport land ownership with Kincaid Park. This is from West Anchorage District Plan, just giving you, again, a dialed-in look at the proximity of the West Turnagain neighborhoods with the airport and the GA facility and then the main airport land, all of which are to be preserved for future growth. There's obviously complications on how to get there, but that's the trend. So I'll go into some more detail on some of these perimeter conflicts. Here's an image of the northwest corner of the airport with the coastal trail superimposed along the perimeter. It's both in red and yellow. The red area is the coastal trail where it exists on airport property with the basic maintenance agreement that can be revoked at any time with, 90-day reference. So I have some rough estimates of distance, but it's basically about 2 miles of the coastal trail are on land that does not have site control on airport property. As well, the coastal trail exists within the Anchorage Water Wastewater Facility land that will also be required to be moved at some point in the future if and when the facility needs expansion. So clarification that we need to make sure everybody understands is Point Warrenzoff Park is actually here, dedicated park. This is Point Warrenzoff Overlook, which the public is very familiar with. This is used, maintained by the municipality in parks. It's on airport land. So it's just illustrating the dispensation of coastal trail and ownership. Again, one of the big planning issues that continues to come to fore is the future possibility for a new runway if and when landings and FAA requires this expansion. It's been identified in the previous airport master plan and now the current recently released master plan. And the optimal location is, I think it's minimum of 1,000-foot separation from the existing north-south runway. Here, and here it is just roughly at 1,000 feet separation. You can see the conflict is very obvious because more than half of this conceptual location, runway and associated facilities, lies within both municipal parkland and the water and wastewater facility. Here's the summary map from the West Anchorage District Plan. It's very complicated, but it's just showing all of the parcels that the district plan addressed and recognized it may have or does have land use and ownership conflicts. This served as the starting point for the task force deliberations to try to address these. I just wanted to point out that the bright green-yellow parcels here, 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 there, up here, are parcels owned within the airport boundary, owned by the airport, that are used by the public and the municipality for parks and rec purposes, obviously as well as the coastal trail. Again, this is another one in Park, Kincaid Park. Those are important areas for a main focus of the task force and the West Anchorage District Plan. I wanted to point out the area that is light blue is the Anchorage Coastal Refuge boundary, Anchorage Coastal Wildlife Refuge. It comes to, I think it's the 20-foot elevation along the bluff. So that area is already managed by Alaska Fish and Game. And I think there's a future ordinance in front of you regarding one of those leases. So I'd like to quickly summarize the task force, which convened early in 2014. We had, I think, 10 meetings. We came up with a set of recommendations, not all of which were agreed to by all members of the group. But we were working off this main policy here from the West Anchorage District Plan, Policy 1A1. I don't need to read it. There's a summary, executive summary in the report. But basically, the findings were, following from the West Anchorage District Plan, that it's likely the most clear way to resolving these long-term issues, complicated issues, centers on a comprehensive land exchange. And the primary components, there you have it. Basically, the municipality would transfer all or portions of parcels 6, 17, and 30. And the map that these are referred to is in the plan, is in the report on page 2. The airport would transfer all or portions of those following parcels, 1 through 29, about parcel those. There are secondary components that were discussed if needed to balance out valuations or extended areas, and they're highlighted on the map. But here they all are. And I'd be happy to go through them, but just suffice to say they're all addressed on this one map in that summary. Very important to this land exchange, if and when it ever happens, is a suite of what I'm calling essential conditions or considerations, many of which need to be addressed and resolved prior to even entering into negotiations for a land exchange. One of the key items that everyone needs to understand, and we checked with the state attorney general, if and when the airport needs to expand for a runway especially, they have the power of eminent domain. But some of the main things here is AWU requires preservation of sufficient land and configuration of sufficient land for future expansion for their facilities as well as related permits. The coastal trail must be moved, if it's moved, must be put in a continuous buffered alignment without a tunnel, acceptable to the municipality and the public, and that obviously will be a long process. The intent would be that the land under the trail would be under permanent site control by the municipality. One of the considerations here is that the airport has agreed to pay for all rerouting, alignment, design, construction costs for the coastal trail. Changing Point Warrenzoff Park, undedicating Point Warrenzoff Park to allow it to be part of this trade has to go to the public, to a ballot, public vote. The airport must obtain sufficient configured land for that future runway, subject to their own permitting. And I wanted to point out that any future runway of that size requires 12 to 15 years roughly to fruition. And we agreed to attempt to make a land exchange phase so that the municipality can acquire the snow dump first, quickly. So here's a real summary estimate of acreage. They're total estimates because we don't know the areas and the lines to be drawn, etc. But basically with the transfer as conceived, the municipality would receive permanent parkland upwards of 235 acres. Areas that are currently used as park that are owned by the airport. We would obtain in addition roughly 90 acres of land that would become permanent parkland, and we would receive the snow dump and permanent site control. In addition, we'd receive portions of airport parcels that would become neighborhood buffers. The airport cannot permanently designate land as airport buffer, so the idea would be as part of the trade for the municipality to receive land in site control that would become permanent airport buffer. And again, that's 70 to 120 plus acres. And obviously we'd receive the coastal trail, an additional permanent park. In exchange, the airport would receive, as part of our 3 parcels, and this is where the estimates are rough, 125 to 200, roughly 50 acres of included as part of AWU's land and part of Point Warrenzoff Park. And now I'd like to get into the snow dump issue a little bit, but the current ordinance in front of you is phase 1 of this exchange essentially, which is attempting to provide for ground lease terms and an effective date for the snow dump so that we get, the snow disposal site, so that we get that into permanent ownership, able to accomplish the required upgrades that were on us right now. In return, the municipality in this phase would commit to sponsoring, to initiating, to sponsor the undedication of Point Warrenzoff, and under terms right now, it's by the end of 2017. And we would enter into an MOU with the airport for addressing all of those considerations and site conditions I highlighted earlier. And Steve's here to talk about the snow dump in more detail.
Yeah, I gave you a 2-page handout, and I think if you look at the map, it'll show you that the area in gold or yellow, that is the area that's covered by this snow disposal site. It's roughly 1/3 the city, and it handles some really high-density areas. And there's a lot more to it. You know, a lot of folks will say, oh, it's just going to cost more to truck it somewhere else. Well, we're at capacity already. In 2012, we exceeded capacity at every site we owned. So, you know, if we have if we lose this capacity, right away our other sites are over capacity. The first thing I have to do is tell DOT you can't use our sites anymore. They've been using our sites for about roughly 13 years that I'm aware of, 12 years. So what that means is that the Minnesota, Benson, and all those big roads, when we have high snow years, they have no, the only capacity they have is they had a small site at the intersection of O'Malley and Old Seward, which they used, which could not handle it. And we are in joint ownership with one on Tudor Road at the intersection of Tudor Road and Campbell Airstrip. So, you know, when you look at 1/3 of the city trying to go to other sites, it's just not feasible for us operationally. And it's not really the dollar value, which is a huge issue us budget-wise, but it's the logistics. Because right away it affects our ability to do Spenard and Arctic Road, which we do while we're staging to do the CBD downtown. We do North Arctic and North, yeah, I'm losing my train of thought. Spenard, just while we're staging for the businesses to close so we can get in here and do the downtown. So we've taken about 25 years to strategically move what used to take 2 to 3 days, moving snow from downtown and Arctic and the other roads to create some safety factors for the pedestrians, because it used to be the snow would sit there for weeks on end. We've dialed this in as close as we can with the manpower and equipment that's available to do as much as we can as fast as we can. So we would lose that capability. So once you start losing these capabilities, it's a snowball effect. Because now, you know, it's going to take trucks longer. In our current contract, we maximize the amount of trucks that are available pretty much every time it snows. Any 6 inches of snow, we use every truck that's available through the private sector, because a lot of individuals aren't interested in doing that. They put the trucks up for the winter, and they're not interested in keeping it insured and bringing it out on an as-needed basis, because it's tough. It's an as-needed basis. So, in a nutshell, this is critical. It's our most important snow site, has been for years. We are working closely with DEC. We've spent almost $1 million designing the required treatment facilities for the water that comes off the snow site, because it all goes into Connors Lake, Connors Bog. Those plans have been shelved. They would have to be dust off. And the only reason we can't meet the requirements is because we don't have long-term access to the land, and so we can't bond for any repairs or upgrades because we have no long-term agreement for that. So it's just one of our critical sites. We need to come to some resolution to move forward. We've been working this since I've been here 13 years. We've been close a couple times, and it just didn't work out for various reasons and changes of personnel, administrations, and such. So if anybody has any questions, I can speak anytime.
Thank you. Mr. Hall has a question.
Yeah. If you had the land, would we have to bond? Is the money available to develop the site, or would that require bonding?
A lot of the money, well, we had it secured twice that I know of, but it's been used for other projects because we never could get the land deal work. So we would, the design is, I think it's probably in the 65% completion. It would have to be dust off and updated, but it would be very doable in short order. The money, we would have to program it again, probably take a year or two to make that happen.
Thank you.
Mr.
What about the
Steele?
situation on the other sites? Do they need treatment as well?
Yes, our other sites have already been accomplished. We own those sites.
Are you done?
Yes. Unless there's
Oh,
questions.
Mr. Evans.
I have, I think, a question for you, and then maybe a question for probably Mr. Parrott, if I'm not jumping ahead. Do we know the amount that we're talking about as far as what we would have to bond for in order to make this just within,
Yeah.
I'm not sure the scale?
Originally, it was around $3 million to upgrade the facility. There's been some discussions because the rules are changing so fast from the DEC and the EPA on what's required for vectors, and we're working with AWU on a vector station. Our goal would be, since our operations are right here, that we would have a vector station here also, which is, you know, all this federal requirements for the Clean Water Act and all those things are requiring us to do a lot more things with everything we take out of the storm drains. that would be the vector station part of it. And we really need to treat this water. I'm surprised there hasn't been more discussion. They know we're working this issue, so they've kind of allowed us to keep operating, but they could turn us off at any time.
I have other questions, but they're more general. Do you want to?
Would you like to answer them, or would you
I
like
could
to?
try. We'll see how
Go
it
for it.
answer. What I understand to be really driving everything, I mean, there was an original concern about encroachment on the airport and the airport's future expansion needs that drove the study. I get that. But the immediacy of it that we're facing now really is just kind of being driven by the snow dump and the EPA regulations that require us to make the modifications. And because we don't own the land, we can't do the bonding. But I also understand that if we have a long-term lease, at least presumably if we had a long-term lease on that property, we could do the bonding. It was kind of vague in the information that I saw. Have we gotten any more information about exactly how long-term the lease would have to be in order for us to be able to do the bonding necessary?
I think the conversations were 25 years. That way, we would see return on our investment for the capital improvements. You know, it's like anything else. You have to have some return on your investments. And I think that's what everything has been targeted at 25.
Sorry, one of the items I gave you highlighted the bond issue. It's not totally certain that we can even deal with the bonds with the lease, but the assumption is it's probable, but it was a minimum of 25 years.
Is the law department working on the answer to that question as to whether we could do it with that lease? Because it seems fundamental that, because if we have the option of being able to do it with that lease, then we can move on to the next stage to see if we can get that lease before we go down any other path.
Yeah, I don't like the answer to that. It's a bond council issue as well.
We have bond counsel, so I'll check to see what
Okay. May I follow up? And I think it's probably a question for you, Mr. Parrott. Does the airport currently in any of its master plans have any kind of projected use for parcel 13, which is the snow dome?
There's not an aviation use currently projected for that. It would probably fall into the general future development. There are limitations on what can be done there because of the relationship with the drop and landing path going over that property.
And as I understood from Mr. Tovish's comments, one of the restrictions on you or FAA regulations or other government regulations that limit what you can do with your property you control. And I just want to be clear on that. Is it the opinion of the airport that they are not legally able to either sell or enter into a long-term lease with the municipality for parcel 13?
We believe we can enter into and long-term is an undefined,
Say 25 years.
25. We believe that we will be able to rationalize and justify to the FAA that there is not a pending aeronautical need for that property for the next 25 years, that other property is available to meet any foreseeable aeronautical need, and therefore we could enter into a 25-year lease for that particular parcel with the municipality. Selling a permanent disposal of the property is a much higher bar. It's generally very difficult to justify selling property that was given to the state or to any entity for an airport and permanently disposing of it.
Understood. And you can cross that bridge and have to get that. That's all the questions I have. Thanks.
You want to continue? You're done? Oh, okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. Mr. Flynn has some questions.
Quite a few. Everyone ready? Mr. Parrott, I was looking at the overhead. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, are you able to conduct simultaneous operations on the east-west runways currently, based on this operation?
You could not conduct simultaneous landings or simultaneous takeoffs. Once again, simultaneous, you I might have an aircraft departing on one while it's on short, while another aircraft is on short final to the other. We can utilize both runways at the same time, going in the same direction, doing the same function at exactly the same time, no. So I hope that answers your question.
So the concept that you've outlined in this airport master plan would allow for simultaneous operations of the north-south runways?
Yes, it would. And the term the FAA uses is the east-west runways are dependent. The proposed north-south runways would be independent.
Pretty sure I knew the answer, but I wanted to make sure I asked the right guy. I recognize we have a unique relationship with the State Department of Transportation. Is there anything that would prohibit a decoupling of this land transfer from the long-term lease from a legal standpoint for the snow dump?
Can I qualify my answer?
Why not?
There's nothing that prevents them being decoupled. However, the airport for many years has been in non-compliance with FAA guidelines by not charging for non-aeronautical use of these airport parcels. That has been in part because we have been able to explain to the FAA that we are pursuing a global comprehensive resolution. If we decouple and we say we're going to lease the snow dump and no further action is pending, then our ability to provide free recreational use of the other airport parcels is probably going to come to an end.
Which leads me to you, Mr. Chakowski. Approximately what capacity of the snow dump is utilized for DOT maintained roads?
Probably 25%. It's mostly residential in our collectors and arterials it's used for. If you look at a map, they only have, a handful of roads through that sector, but they're primary roads. It's Jewel Lake,
International,
Minnesota International, So they do very little hauling on Minnesota except for the north end, but it's significant, especially in heavy snow years. When everything gets pushed back and there's no place to go, it always goes to the snow facilities.
And to what extent did you guys do due diligence on, for example, the Granite property when that came up for sale?
Pardon? I'm sorry.
To what extent did you do due diligence on other sites, like, for example, the Granite property when it came up for sale?
Well, at that point in time,
If the answer is zero, you can tell me.
well, no, we looked at everything. I mean, everything in that area we looked at over with the previous administration, with the Begich administration, and with this
Granite
administration.
property came up for sale a year and a half ago.
Well, we looked at it prior to that. There were some discussions that would go up for sale. A lot of the problems is the runoff. Where does the runoff go? And that's why this site is ideal, because it rehydrates the wetlands. And if most of our snow sites do that, they rehydrate wetlands.
Follow up before I keep going.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with the state, the quantity that they plow. Didn't we have arrangements with the state that we would plow some of their roads, they would plow some of ours, so you didn't have this lifting of the blade kind of
We
thing?
do have a tour agreement with the state,
Does
yes.
that work on the hauling of the snow as well?
No, the hauling is pretty much independent on what they own. And we don't deal with very little of their collectors or arterials. It's mostly the residential. They have some, I call them cats and dogs, that are out there, Johns Road, some other areas in neighborhoods that our trade-off is we usually give them our arterials and we do some of the residential areas. It's a better trade-off for us for the types of equipment we have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dee, can you go back to the slide that shows the conceptual runway lineup? Yeah, you just passed it. Right there. Mr. Jokelman.
Sure.
So, One of your predecessors, when we were discussing our primary treatment permit for the Asplin wastewater treatment facility, indicated that loss of that permit would cost us roughly $1 billion, and we'd have to move to a tertiary treatment system. Is that still more or less the case?
That's still the case. Were we to expand that to advanced secondary or tertiary, our estimates are 700 to $1 billion.
And this alignment obviously would interfere with the mixing zone that you currently enjoy. What risk does that create in terms of our primary treatment permit?
Well, it's not clear that this would necessarily mess with the mixing zone that exists. The outfall is at the northern end of the runway, right at Point Ronza, not adjacent to the plant. So the mixing zone is actually just off the top of the screen right now. That said, there is a concern, or we do have a concern, that the expansion of the runway into the tidelands could affect the hydraulics of the mixing zone, and that might have an effect on the continued operation under the existing permit, and we want to make sure that gets resolved.
Anything else, Madam Chair? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I have an announcement to make. Just so everybody knows ahead of time that on Tuesday, we will open up the public hearing, but we're going to continue the public hearing to the second meeting in August, which will be August 25th. And I just wanted to let everybody know ahead of time, you're welcome to come out and testify on Tuesday, but if you testify on Tuesday, you won't be able to testify again necessarily. Okay? Thank you. Mrs. Dale?
Ostensibly, I presume that is for a number of purposes, but also since we're in the process of changing administrations, that does give the new administration a chance to get up to speed on some of this too. So I think it's a good compromise.
Thank you for your comments, Mrs. Dale. Any other comments? Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for being here.